If you're looking for coherence and alignment within all the parts of yourself, there's no more judgment. And never have ever turned my ringer on. My ringer signified the burnout that I experienced when my business partner would call me at 6 a.m. on Monday mornings. You know, in some ways, when we think about the shared experience that we're all a part of and thinking that you're going through something unique that no one's ever gone through is kind of like batshit crazy. No one knows what it's like to feel like what I'm feeling like. Build your identity capital. Sounds like a terrible ultimatum. It means continue to do that and find the weirdness and celebrate it.
Welcome to Finding Your Groove. If you're living and working in a way that's in sync with who you are or you want to be, then you're in the right place. Each episode, we swap stories with guests who have found out that the traditional path isn't set up for people like us. The podcast was created to help listeners like you feel less alone on this journey. Through stories and being in community with each other, we can avoid burnout and inspire each other to keep going. I'm Josh Green.
And I'm Taylor Harrington, and today's guest is Jonas Altman. On this episode, we cover what it's like to be a recovering people pleaser, recognize burnout, the power of asking for support, and boundaries around what to share and what not to share on LinkedIn and other corners of the internet. Jonas is a founder, a certified coach, and author who is passionate about helping entrepreneurs embrace change and thrive through life's transitions. His company is called Social Fabric, an award-winning design practice that partners with some of the world's boldest organizations to create innovative and collaborative work environments. He's worked with leaders globally to help them navigate change, and he's a sought-out speaker who knows how to connect with audiences in powerful, relatable ways. If you're someone who loves leading with your heart, is looking to dial up your vulnerability in moments of need, and believes risks can lead to joy, this one's for you. Jonas, let's go ahead and dive into today's episode with our show and tell. What the heck did you bring for us today, and how does that relate to the journey of who you are as a human?
Yes. So I'll hold this up to show you.
And please describe it for the listeners.
Yeah. So it's a sort of book or small book style, metal, heavy-ish container. Now you say, what could I put in there? Right? Well, instead of telling you what you could put in there, I'll tell you what my grandfather put in there because this is his. He put his business cards in here. And when people came to his desk in downtown Vancouver, by the way, his name was Jonas Altman. He was a Queen's Counsel attorney. Now he'd be a King's Counsel if he was still alive, bless his soul. And so he has these business cards. My brother still has his OG business card. So I didn't actually get that for you. And I was gifted this, and it represents, I think, a scene from the Bible. I might have to check with Josh later. There's a dove and a fox. So it kind of looks like the Old Testament, a siddur, but it also masks as a business card. So you could balance spirituality and commerce.
Oh, I love that.
Also, you could not see my grandfather when you walked into his office because he had so much crap on his table. So he was the most disorganized person. And he has 3 sons. My dad is the most organized person. So I think it skipped a generation. So my dad became the systems guy, which we might talk about. And I became the anti-systems guy. So it skips every generation, I'm convinced. Well, I should say I use hyperboles a lot. Like, I'm not anti-system. I'm more of like having a operating system and then trying out a bunch of apps all the time. So my foundational operating system as a human is to know that I'm imperfect and that my systems will fail. So how do I build robust and flexible systems that can adapt to context and to environment and to mood and to energy?
It's really interesting because I often think that when you're crafting a life of your own, you actually need more structure than living a life of something that is more conventional, but the structure just has to be more refined in some ways because it has to be able to move with you as you're moving through your world. So it's not less structure. We're not like, oh, well, there was a system that maybe I was part of and now I'm not part of it, so I have less structure in my life. Actually, I need more structure. I need more nuance about have agency over my time or stay on top of projects, for instance. So I appreciate the specificity of that.
I don't like to admit it as someone who cares for the planet. I do a lot of laundry because I get activated, not all the time. And that's a way to have control over something as well as wiping down the kitchen counter So cleaning as a self-soothing mechanism or tool is 100% one of my systems. Is don't have control over what's happening in US politics or in other places in the world, but I can have clean underwear right now, even if I don't need to wear it. I can just have it in the cupboard.
Okay, so I want to go back to business cards for a second because I feel like I've only had one business card in my life and I got to create it and it was very wacky. And the instructions I was given in creating it were that it should tell a story and it should be able to manipulate the story in like a different direction depending on who I'm talking to. So the concept was that on one side, I had like my name, my job title, and on the back side, there was this graph. And there was nothing on the like axes for it. It was just a graph of things going in like a positive direction. And that depending on who I was talking to, I could tell a story about what that graph meant. So if I wanted to say like, oh, you know, this about increasing the following of our social media followers by X% or whatever I wanted, like however I wanted to share that story. I'm curious, have you ever had a business card that you loved or one that like have you ever had a business card moment that sticks out to you? Because I feel like now living in New York at age 27, I'm like, I don't have a business card and I don't meet people that have business cards. QR business cards are a whole thing. So I want to hear your business card story.
I'm going to really date myself now. Do you have a resume or a CV, as they say in England?
I do.
Yeah.
I did. Like, I do. It's not updated, but I do.
So I think of a business card formally as a tool. And the tool was what you do with LinkedIn if you ever hold your phone up to someone's. It's like, I need your contact. So I was in the music industry first and then selling clothes in the fashion industry. And I just had stacks of business cards. And I had a stack of like music business cards, which is about breadth and not depth. So it's just like, how many can I get at a conference? And then I'd go through, I'd basically be trying to sell, even though I should probably be try to have a relationship. And so, for example, I'd email Maurizio in Italy and he'd be like, Jonas, hey, ciao. And now we've taken the business card onto email at the time. So business cards typically were a tool and there was no liberating structure or a conversation starter embedded in the tool, which is why I love what you said. I've had very slick, fat, thick, well-designed business cards. People go, ooh, wow. And then never hear from them or like don't respond to me. And I've also had like woo.com in London was this company and I printed up thin ones, very much like you, adaptive. So I had like 10 different business cards with different images and I would whip them out and it'd be like I'd pick or they'd pick and it was fun. It was a conversation starter. So I've done both. I mean, if someone gives you a business card now, that's suspect.
I don't think any of these like QR code scanning apps have created an experience. And I'm waiting for someone to create a great connection experience through that because it is easier in the sense that you're like whipping out your phone and trading the information very quickly. So that it's like right in a contact. And yet I want that experience. I want that wow fanning across like, which one do you choose? Like there's something really cool about that.
Well, we could have a Groove business conference where entry requires you to have a stack of business cards. I also think that like the cards that I do keep are nostalgic from restaurants or places that I'm like wowed and I want to keep a souvenir or give it to someone to remember. And also sometimes I take a business card, but I transfer the information and then throw it away. So it has a job to be done is what I'm trying to say. And what's that job? Are you going to keep the business card? Probably not. What I kept in here was my birth certificate and highly precious things like library card that I never use because you don't need it. And then here was like memorabilia, things that like I wanted to keep that were somewhat sacred or nostalgic. And so that's what I used my grandfather's business card holder for. At one point, I thought maybe I'd put it on my desk when I had like a dedicated office and I'd, hey, do you want a cigarette or would you like a business card?
You could put snacks in there.
I think what's interesting for me is about how the role of connection works in modern day professional networks and realities. Like I think often, Taylor, about how a LinkedIn profile is now somewhat of your calling card in loads of dimensions, especially for people that aren't going to offices often or working from home or crafting unconventional lives. Actually, your personal website, your LinkedIn profile become these portals to tell a story about who you are.
So something I've noticed about you in our last couple of calls and being a fan I'm the Facebook administrator of the Josh Green fan club. You're presenting a self on LinkedIn or online that I wasn't aware of through hours of conversation with you. Same with Taylor. So what I'm getting are really juicy breadcrumbs that I can now piece together or weave together a new narrative from you in your journey of meditation, from your journey in entrepreneurship, from younger parts of yourself that are still parts of you that I never even knew because I've only known you, 4 or 5 years. So I think that's lovely. And it can be dangerous either for a sense of self, where your identity is changing and shifting and you're not really sure who you are, which Josh am I today. It could be also really playful and experimental and nourishing to experiment with parts of yourself in public and see how it resonates. There was one post you put up recently and it was like bang on. I wish I remembered. I think it was from yesterday or the day before. And it resonated. And so the impulse is like, or just observe and like, and not let anyone know, or maybe comment. But what I love about you is the phone just rings. You're like, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm making ribs. I mean, I'm not making ribs. That's you. And so I get to see a new part or discover a new part of Josh and Taylor, which formerly, I'd say in the last year, I wasn't aware of.
First, thank you for that reflection. I'm curious how you navigate like the diversity of yourself in your life and like career and showing up in, because I think a lot of listeners, at least a lot of people that I spend time with on Groove, they have all of these different parts of themselves that they're trying to figure out, how do I integrate what parts, what are my boundaries of my professional life? Those are very deep themes that a lot of people struggle with. If I build a brand that's me, does that mean I have to share all of me? How do I have a healthy relationship with stepping into different parts of myself? Where do my boundaries sit and lie? And how you've sort of navigated that. And also curious, because as you wrote Shapers, you were seeing different people's stories that were these like multi-hyphenate often, curious about the things that you collected along the way.
I wish I had a simple answer. I really am convinced, like, the saying, there's no one size fits all. If you're looking for coherence and alignment within all the parts of yourself, there's no more judgment. So before this talk, I have a very large pleaser in me, which I call my recovering people pleaser. And I have a very embryonic, somewhat teenager, boundaried asserter in me. Not cool. Stop that. Don't treat that person that way. I can't do that. That's like two parts of myself that are very pronounced. And I spent most of my life thinking that one was way better. And then I spent a longer time thinking that the other one was better, the one that was an outsider and was more dormant. And now I'm starting to see integration and unification and non-duality. So that's just two parts of myself. And the average person, from what I know, has between 5 to 9 dominant parts of themselves. Some people way above 50. What I love about that idea versus something like bipolar, which is a diagnosis, would be like an open plan office where you're aware of all of the parts of yourself that are offering and protecting and there for valid reasons, versus being locked in a room unaware of each other where you're disassociated. And you're like, I'm like, where did Josh go? Like all of a sudden you're like someone completely different. I'm like, I like the other Josh. So if that coherence is strong within you and you could go, okay, I'm going to be a little bit more playful and edgy on Instagram, a little bit more professional and muted on LinkedIn, a little bit more elaborative and expansive on Substack, then you're just going context dependent. How are people playing in this playground? Because I'm in a sync to the norms, the rituals, the beliefs, the implicit, rules. So that's how I've navigated. And I fuck up all the time, pardon my French. In fact, what I always find is if I get activated, then that's a good sign, because that means there's a growth opportunity or there's something to turn the spotlight into me to go, why does that piss me off a bit? Is it because it is something I want to be doing or someone I admire? Is it because I have jealousy and envy? Is it because I am holding on to a story that there's a right way and that's the right way as opposed to my way that's unique to my disposition and season of my life? So that's why I don't have an answer. But I hope that that colored how I navigate that a bit. And the stories I learned of people like you and our mutual friends is everyone has this. And Obama has it, and the Dalai Lama has it, and Ariana Huffington has it, even though we might not see that when we read their bios.
We've had a number of conversations that are quite abstract and enjoy being in the sort of the worlds of thought. I'd love to spend most of the rest of the time of this podcast hearing about your journey and you sort of figuring out the things that have worked for you along the way. And before that, on this series, we've been exploring, we all somewhat started in some system. Most guests always knew that from early in their lives that the system didn't serve them in the best way, whatever system or game that they were playing. But we'd love to go back to who was Jonas maybe before you stepped out or started to find a path that really felt much more authentically you. And maybe go back to a moment where you noticed the tension between the life that you were living and the way that you wanted it.
That's a deep question. I think the first inkling of a system was more about scripts and the dominant culture of me growing up. So you could call that the shoulds. And I got into skateboarding and breakdancing and athletics as a sort of, I don't want to say rebellion, but let's say an act of resistance or statement of, I'm going to do things differently. Not that you can't just, be a skateboarder or a breakdancer and also, conform to society, and many people do. But it was those little outlets that I found a different culture or subculture. So that was my first introduction, which was like, oh, these are, in effect, punks, the anti-whatever the dominant culture was. So that was the first one.
Do you have a moment that you remember that there was like, I'm deciding how I'm spending my weekend, or there was like, I'm planning a trip, or I'm expected to show up at this and I'm going to do that, and like how old you might have been at like that, feeling that tension?
Well, I remember I had a longboard and I had a job as a barista, which I got fired from, which we could talk about. And I remember just skateboarding so long to get to work, but there was a sort of tension between like playing and responsibility. So like, screw this, I'm going to go to the skate park, or I'm not going to do that. And I think the way I balanced it out is I got to the coffee shop and then I just made coffee for everyone and had such a great time with people, but I was giving away lots of free coffee, including ice cream. I made the first Frappuccino ever, like ice cream, cookies, chocolate sauce, espresso. Anyway, that moment for sure. But the moment that really strikes out was working in a record company in Clapham Junction, and it was open plan. There's about 9 people. There was a woman who was a lifelong employee, meant very well, and was very rigid and set in her ways. And I worked across from her. And so she represented the opposite. Her way was to get on the phone. You all right? Yeah. So I've got some new jazz funk records from South London. Interested in purchasing 20, 50? And she'd just get on there, Glengarry Glen Ross, closing. I'd get on, I would call Japan, or I don't know, I'd email Japan, and I'd put the best part of the record, the drum beat, onto the phone and give them a taste. It happened to be the best sample, but the rest of the record was rubbish. And they go, give me 200. And then I was like, it was very much a competitive environment. And I didn't thrive in that environment. I found it kind of counterintuitive because we're all on the same team. Like a sale is a sale for the company. So that environment was really interesting. And the characters there, I think, were my first model of people who operated out of fear. Like they were fear-based leaders or fear-based managers or fear-based workers, premised, I think, on the Peter principle that you'll rise to the highest level of your competence or unconscious incompetence. And that was interesting for me. So that was, I was exactly Taylor's age. I was actually 26, and I quit in November of 2000, and in October of 2003 is when I quit. So almost 21 years ago.
I want to hear this quitting.
No, going back, maybe.
But I also want to turn the question over to Josh, because I think you just said something that's really interesting, which is like, when did doing things differently work out? When was it like maybe more successful in a certain way? When was it the way to go? And like how those moments where we realize like, oh, when I did things differently, that led to even more records being sold. Because those moments also validate, oh, doing things differently is a good thing. And it's not always, I think like, that's something that's interesting to think about. Like, when did we have those moments where it was like, this was actually rewarded? So Josh, I'm curious if there's an example of that came up for you.
The thing that comes up for me when I think about doing things differently and it working out, in my early 20s, there's lots that we could talk about, but to keep this story brief, I dropped out of college. That's a story in its own right. And then I had to figure out what the heck am I going to fill my time with? And I did a bunch of things. I was fortunate to build a couple of businesses and I learned a lot along that way. Then I left those. I sold my part of those businesses to my business partners. And I jumped into doing a bunch of stuff that I had no idea how to do. The thing was, I was pretty sure that as long as I felt reasonable at how much I was charging people to tell them I could do something, I wouldn't feel bad about, oh, am I going to do a great job or am I not going to do a great job? And everyone around me was like, no, you can't sell it like that. You've got to figure out how to do it. And I was like, I'm just learning. I'm just experimenting and learning. And it came up in one of our other episodes, just talking about how much experimentation plays a role in taking steps in the right direction. But I ended up doing a bunch of consulting projects, technology, finance, strategy, innovation. And by just jumping into the projects, I knew enough to get by, but I didn't feel confident that I was going to hit home runs. And some of them I didn't hit home runs. Let's just be clear. Like, I don't think I did a great job in my early 20s at hitting a home run every time. But having that approach accelerated my learning to figure out where should I play? Like, where am I? Like, where is my zone of genius? Where do my superpowers live? And having that orientation towards jumping in, where everyone around me was like, no, don't sell something you don't know how to do. And I was like, I know how to do 30% of it. That's like enough. And so someone told me once, and I think it's it's definitely run with me through every opportunity I've ever looked at. You should never take on an opportunity that you know less than 30% of how to do it. But if you take on a job opportunity that you know more than 70% how to do it, you're going to be bored within 3 months. There's like a great window of opportunities that there's enough that I'm going to learn to force me to grow. And at the same time, I'm going to know enough just to get by. and that really reflected those early 20s where it's like, okay, I'm just going to jump in and sell whatever people want from me and I'll see what happens. And that really transformed my 20s and led me into a number of opportunities, including running this amazing music venue in London that I wouldn't have been part of otherwise.
Love that.
I want to jump back to Jonas. So there was a moment that you quit. You know it very specifically, October 2003 or November 2003. And I'm curious how you knew. Was this a moment where you felt like there was a new direction emerging in life, like a new North Star for your work? Or was it on the other side of just, I can't be here anymore? I don't know what's going to become. Curious to know, because I think a lot of listeners, they're still in sales in a way that doesn't nourish them. What was the signals to help you make that decision?
Well, I can tell you, I'm going to misremember. I'll remember this wrong, and it will be a narrative fallacy. But the story that I still hold on to is a part of me was subordinating myself, leaving a whole bunch of my unemployable selves at the door before I walked into this record company. And I would do all of those things. I was doing martial arts. I was cycling to work. I was getting all of my London energy outside of the 9 to 5. But those 8 hours, sometimes 10 hours, my soul was sapped, like slowly, like it was just undeniable. So there was a definite reaction to, let's call it like employed life pressure. And as well, the psychological contract starting to shift where I'm giving way more to get the same outputs, or in sometimes way less to get the same outputs, but having to be present. And for someone who's highly active and energetic, to sit still for 8 hours was next to impossible. And people would always be like, where's Jonas? And I'd be like, in the back looking at the vinyl, or like on the phone somewhere, or like making a super long cup of tea, taking as long as I could. PG tea, in case anyone's wondering. And at the same time, I had some confidence because I had gotten a bank loan from NatWest and made some sales on the side, which is probably not the most ethical, but it wasn't music sales. It was in clothing. So I was taking what I knew I could do, back to your point of a skill that I had, I think at the time, 50 or 60% know-how. And I had this sort of purchase order that gave me this sort of self-belief and conviction. It's like, why do I need this entity, which no longer exists? For nostalgia's sake, the company was actually called Time Warp, which is maybe ironic or kind of Back to the Future. They ended up moving to SidCup and then eventually just closing shop. So there was like a knowing. And that intuition was very soft in me, if I think back, but it was there. And it was like, don't ignore me. Like, there's something else for you. There's another way.
It's cool to hear how those little moments like add up along the way to build confidence, to build that possibility of like, I'm going to make these micro decisions that end up leading to a bigger decision of, hey, I'm going to quit. But like that behind the scenes of like, well, you made that decision to say, let me do this other thing before that. And let me do this other thing before that. And go ahead. I feel like there's something really powerful about that.
I should say I've worked with and know many people who've had side hustles turn into their main hustle, their venture. So lots of metaphors. One is you're on a cruise ship or a big boat and you're building your raft or your, hopefully, maybe your speedboat to like, head off. From a legal point of view, there's a lot of like conflict of interest and potential ethical issues. My hand's up here. I'm interested in energetically what it's like to be cutting off parts of yourself and giving the best or worst parts to your employer or the best and worst parts to your venture. And when is it at a point where you no longer can ignore that your venture is the thing that is no longer a side hustle, or you don't want to keep that way. And it's amazing to watch people navigate that. And I'm almost 100% convinced, I haven't had anything other, that honesty is the best policy. So if you can enroll your employer into the activities and the things that you want, obviously this is context dependent, they will either be an evangelist and a supporter, or you're going to quit and it's going to accelerate what's inevitable.
I'm curious with this boat analogy here, like when did you commit to your raft? At what moment were you like, I'm not just getting on the raft and quitting, like I'm staying on this raft?
There's a feeling still and a sense of that boat is so far in the distance, there's no going back. Like I'm fucked. Like I am at sea. And there's stories of people swimming like, 17 miles when they didn't even know how to swim that far just to like survive. So there was an element of there is no going back. And then I don't know how spiritual or the practices of the listeners, but if you believe in like conspiracies of the universe, or in Hebrew, besheret, meant to be, there's signals that start to come and you're more prepared and ready to see and maybe seize those opportunities. And that's what started to happen. It was like, oh, talk to Jonas, or like, did you know this? And then you come out of your shell, and back to Josh's wonderful thing, my 50, 60% started to move. And I would say, and I don't know if this is true, because I have a Canadian at the time / North American accent, many people that I was selling to thought that I was transient and not always there. So there was an urgency that if I met with someone, that there was like a need to say yes or no. And I learned how to navigate the maybes that were probably going to be a no, or the maybes that were probably going to be a yes, over the course of a year or two. So then I could focus my energy and develop richer relationships. And in many ways, it was the 80-20. 80% of my revenue was coming from 3 retailers, and the rest was coming from all these independents. You look at most businesses and it's basically energy output. Can you get 80% of your impact, your creativity, and your finances from your 20, 30% most prolific or powerful clients? And then at the same time, the danger of that, because if something happens, things can really shift quickly. So that was a sort of learning by doing that ended up working out. And I had the same experience with Josh. So I got into business with a business partner. We started to scale, we started to go bigger, we started to hire people, more pressure, more stock. And I started to have the physical and mental reactions that are synonymous with burnout. And at that point, I was now early 30s. And this is my story. This is true because I have a friend who was there. I was playing Frisbee in Queen's Park after a very stressful day. And my friend Sal, who's one of my closest friends from Sicily, he looked at me. He's like, "You're not you. What's wrong?" And, no one had said that to me because I had very much, my ego is big and I was like Wolf of Wall Street, And I started to tear up and I said, "I'm really unhappy. And I really don't like how I'm living my life and my days." And he was like, "You should do something about that." And that's when I think I pulled a Josh Green move and I changed my environment. I went back to school. I did a master's and a teaching degree, and I found another tribe that was more interested in spending an hour talking about matters of the soul and doing things differently. And that became my obsession with new ways of working. There's got to be a different way for us to come together to do great work, which is a great Margaret Mead quote. And now, COVID or the last decade has revealed to us, yes, there is. I can stack my computer on 2 books and zap into you in New York and Vermont, Virginia, right? It's wonderful. And it's also kind of dystopian in a way, Orwellian, because I could just not be wearing pants right now. I am wearing trousers in case you're wondering.
For the record.
Answered it. It was a little meandering. It's sort of like a knowing and a trusting as well as feedback from the world, back to Josh's learning quest. What am I learning? Am I taking on this feedback? And if so, how? And is it additive? Is it regenerative? Is it leading to more whatever your goals are?
It's interesting to hear the arc of the journey in so many ways, because I think it also speaks to the fact that there isn't just one jumping off point, that there are these different moments that reveal different parts of ourselves. And, there's this role that you weren't happy in it, gave you some confidence to do something else. And then, I started a business and it started to get too big and I'm burning out. And this also is making me unhappy. And I'm imagining there are multiple of these arcs as you start to discover what really sets me up for success. And I look at your life now and there's a lot of balance. There's a lot of time where you're working and also time where you're fully living. And I think I personally look to you as someone that really has crafted a life in so many ways that is truly you. and it's clear that your priorities your values shape your time. And that's really special. And I'm curious, what is the compass that you use to guide life now? Yeah, let's start there.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I always love your reflections. I too, in our non-meeting in real life yet, am in admiration and inspired by the things that you've built and do and who you are. The thing I've learned from you a lot is honing into the heart and the gut and balancing that with my overactive brain. I just got off a call with someone who's a somatic coach and really kind of has this beautiful foundation of non-duality, parts at the top, process, and then the sort of ambivalence and coherence that might lead you to be unified, even though you have multiple selves. So part of me at this point in my life is leaning towards that nature, connection, community, regenerating in the tribe energy, as opposed to previous, which was go, 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 the hustle, New York, London, time is money, which is an outdated model, and work hard and get ahead is a fallacy, as so is some ways the nuclear family. So that's a whole thing. This compass, is what feels right. That's what I had thought of when you asked that. So is it feel energetically right? What happens when I get a message from Josh? Do I throw my phone and go, how dare he? Who does he think he is messaging me at 7 a.m. with a cute emoji of his dog? As opposed to, hallelujah, Josh thought of me, of all the humans on the planet, and sent me a message. And then I still don't reply. But then, so a lot of it is a sense check of what is the immediate felt sensation when you think about writing that article, meeting that person for a coffee, doing that gig that 90% or that 20%. So that would be one. I thought about the environment. A lot of people talk about, whether it's neurodiversity or ADHD, to have the right habitat and the right environment to be conducive to your mood, your energy, your mindset, your way of navigating the world. And kitchen standing up would be a lot different maybe than sitting down in a sort of stuffy office for this conversation. And you beautifully set the mood by saying, be somewhere that you can wear yourself. You can't see, but I'm wearing Hoka slides. So I'm wearing these like fun shoes. I thought about parts work, and I'm doing some training, but I've also done IFS, so no bad parts. And that can lead to a lot of acceptance, self-acceptance, and like, yeah, I'm quirky and weird, and so be it. Like, that's who I am. And that leads to living in a way that is not traditional. And then I say, what is traditional? Tell me when the average divorce rate is 64%, when the scan of who lives in a house is no longer necessarily a heterosexual couple that's married. It's same-sex couples, it's widows, it's students that are living together, and it's people who can't afford homes that are getting together and buying land. It's so diverse than the story that we've been or script that we've been told.
There's a theme that is very strong for me, which I don't know if it's true or not, but just the quality of the compasses that keep coming up in conversations is so much more about emergent living rather than like very goal-based. Not that people don't have goals, but much more trust in what emerges. And even what you're describing now is just like people are living in less conventional ways, and they're modeling the possibility of those less conventional ways, and I'm curious for you how much the role of people and community has played in that truth of I can live emergently.
There's a lot of discord or dissonance leaving London or moving from a city like that where I lived for 12 years. And I've lived as well in similar places to you. I've lived in Jerusalem, I've lived in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and I've been mostly nomadic or predominantly nomadic for the last decade. So my sense of place and connection is fractured. And it is also coherent and makes sense because I can hop on a call, get on a plane, go visit someone who being in their presence could in effect be, you could do the math, maybe equivalent to, 5 WhatsApp calls over the year. Like, you don't really do a comparison, but I met my friend from Australia who our mutual friend Allison introduced me by him coming over here after 3 years of knowing each other. And it was like instant solidification of what I knew to be true, having never met him in real life. So that I think is beautiful. What I have realized is that I was limiting my ability to be coherent and in resonance by looking at like either or, like friends in London versus friends in Vancouver. I think every person's family has elements of crazy and can be activating for them. 100% mine can be, and so can I. So how do I find ways to be with family and be attending and present to that beautiful tribal and blood connection? So I'm a work in progress, but I think now I don't have such a sort of black and white kind of thinking. It's much more liminal and emergent in that I belong wherever I choose to and get like neurofeedback or some external feedback that is the case.
I'm bringing in a quote that's actually from Dr. Seuss. You said the word weird, and it really made me think of this. And it says, we're all a little weird, and life's a little weird. And when we find someone whose weirdness is compatible with ours, we join up with them and fall in mutual weirdness and call it love. And I think that's like one of the coolest things about finding people who embrace your weird is like they recognize it's your weird and their weird might be different, but there's like this cool compatible part of it that allows that friendship to blossom. And like I've found that it's given me more permission to be my version of weird when I'm around other people who embrace whatever that means for them. And yeah, I just like hearing you talk about that community side of it. And I think that's what's so cool about, when we talk about like the age of work right now and the fact that we are on this call, or even like inside of Groove, like that is the thing that just like lights me up like crazy, is the fact that I can form a relationship with someone that I probably would have never ended up in a room with because they're on the other side of the world. And yeah, that part of it's really cool. I also thought it was interesting. I've had the experience with when I was younger, would think a lot about community in terms of circles, like circles in my life. So there are like people that fall into this circle, people that fall into this circle. In the last few years, I've just sort of let those circles blend a lot more and allowed that cross-pollination to happen. And it was really funny to let it go. And I'm sure Josh even like heard me, like I feel like I've processed it over the last 3 years, especially living in New York and seeing those different circles come together in real life experiences and allowing that like maybe someone who kind of fell into like more of that work circle or professional circle, meeting my roommate from college, or like I've invited to my mom to certain gatherings that I've hosted in my apartment alongside people I've worked with, or girls I met from book club, whatever it was, and to allow that like that messiness of the weird coming together and people from different parts of my life recognizing like these are the things that make me me is really special. So I don't know where I'm going with this other than I hear you and I can relate to that love of the weird.
I'd love to build on that.
Sure, let's please.
I love the quote. Thanks for sharing it. And I think it resonates and it's so true. And I think of a conversation that happened, not that I was a part of, but I was eavesdropping. Actually, I was walking.
Oh my gosh, I love this. This is like some real tea, some gossip.
Yeah, it's some tea, yes. So I told you that Montreal is a pretty cool city. I'm assuming that these women who are in college were from Montreal because they were switching between French and English. Je m'appelle Jonas, j'habite à Vancouver, like whatever they were doing. That's the only French I know. And then, boom, they drop identity capital into the conversation. And maybe because of French or not. And I'm like, that's interesting. I know social capital. I know creative capital. It turns out Erik Erikson, our famous sociologist that came up with the self-determination theory, autonomy, mastery, and purpose, talks about identity capital being the things that make Taylor, what makes you you, your skills, your competencies, your interests, and the people you know. So if I think back to my 27-year-old self, and I said to me, which I'm saying to you, build your identity capital, which sounds like a terrible ultimatum. It means continue to do that and find the weirdness and celebrate it. The other term that came up in that eavesdropping session was creative output, as if the two go hand in hand. Back to Josh's question around the multiple selves, expressing yourselves in different platforms or in different dinner parties, if you go to dinner parties or conversations. Who are you in that moment? Well, you're a reflection of the person and the energy that is before you or the people, and you may sync and adapt, and most likely will, to their mirror neurons or their vibe, but you'll also be uniquely yourself. Kind of thinking of yourself as like, we could do tea, but maybe I'll do Cokes. So you're Coca-Cola, Coke Zero, Diet Coke, Vanilla Coke, Cherry Coke. We want Coca-Cola. Which Coke do we want? It's got caffeine, but it's got a little bit of a different flavor. Then you're getting all of Taylor's sodas. And you might tell me you're getting the vanilla cherry today. I'm like, awesome.
Oh my gosh, I love that image. Yeah. It's super
I do like Cherry Coke, by the way, just in case you're curious.
Well, and it's interesting, going back to like LinkedIn for a second, it is interesting. Like I wrote a post the other day where I said, like, everyone here is only getting a sliver of me, and that's intentional. Like you're getting a great sliver of me. It's not that you're not getting a real version of me. It's all me. But no, I'm not. There are certain things I'm not going to talk about on LinkedIn because those are private. And like sometimes really cool stories emerge that I don't want to share with the world. Like, I want to keep them. I want to be able to talk about them at that dinner party and it be a special conversation that no one's going to read about on LinkedIn after. And I think that's what's so interesting. If you really get to know someone in those different contexts, you get that exposure to those different flavors of Coke in your example. And that's a really cool thing, to be a friend that can identify those different flavors and see you show up on different days in different ways.
It's like such an emergent story here with Jonas. I've really appreciated it, because you really, the way that you carve out life is a real inspiration to me, and to, I imagine, to listeners, of like trusting, like really like leaning into that emergent way of living and learning. And I guess that I would love to close with a question of, what are the things you lean on when the path is not feeling so easy? Because it's not easy. I think we all know that our unconventional paths aren't easy. You know, the grass is always greener on the other side. But what do you lean on when you're trying to figure out, or when you're trying to get the strength back?
I mean, sticking with our Coke analogy, I don't lean on vanilla cherry Coke, but I have like I like to think I have a very strict diet, and that's typically around media. So very regulated use of Instagram, sometimes LinkedIn, the digital Shabbat every Friday to Saturday night for the last 3 years, and never have ever turned my ringer on, which, in case you're interested, is something I became aware of without any help of anyone, that my ringer signified the burnout that I experienced when my business partner would call me at 6 a.m. on Monday morning screaming I'm not at the warehouse, or that I'm sleeping and not working. God forbid. So that would be one point. And then the inverse is good inputs, and inputs being, people and places and podcasts and anything else you can think that starts with the letter P. And then I would say for sure, like, the ability to have support systems and be able to be vulnerable and see it as a superpower. So when someone says like, how's it going? Or are you okay in England? You all right? Yeah, you all right? No one goes, you all right? Like, no, I'm not. I'm actually not well. And I'm guilty of it, as probably you at some point, to know that you're letting other people surge and step into their power by you being willing to let them know that you need to lean on them. And I haven't been doing that for a lot of my life. So and I miss out on the juice. So that would be probably, I started with the lowest with Diet Coke and like getting rid of Instagram, but that's the big one. And that's, in some ways, when we think about collective effervescence, another term I like, it's the shared experience that we're all a part of, and thinking that you're going through something unique that no one's ever gone through is kind of like batshit crazy to believe that, but yet we still do. No one knows what it's like to feel like what I'm feeling like. Watch Inside Out, or Inside Out 2, which I haven't watched.
I need to watch Inside Out 2 as well. Maybe we can both watch with like a cherry Coke and talk about it after.
Next time we talk, I might have another answer, but I might read you a quote about writing that I love. Here's the quote. It's from E.L. Doctorow. Writing is like driving at night in the fog. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. So spun into this is like, you just need to see a little bit in front and trust in that. I think that that's a really beautiful metaphor. It doesn't always work or work as easy or as well, but the belief in it, I think, is helpful.
I really think that captures the theme of this emergent path, and a reorientation towards that. Thanks so much for being on the show with us today, Jonas.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for a fun conversation.
This was lovely. And I don't know why I'm now craving a Coke. Like I have to end this episode and walk down. Do you have one for me? Please pass it through our video chat so I can enjoy it.
Original tasting mini Coke for Taylor. Actually, I have 3 different Cokes here. Original mini tasting for Josh. And I also have a Diet Coke. I think I had a Diet Coke. So let me just see if I can grab that.
I would love to end this episode with the sound of your Coke can opening and that just be the mic drop moment.
This something about this tomorrow. I found a beer, but okay. Oh, so this is not an ad. This is bottled happiness, and it's still summer, September 5th.
Cheers. Thanks, guys. Taylor, what a conversation with Jonas. Wow. Yeah. So what's alive from you for that?
Yeah, it's been a couple of weeks since we recorded that one. And I just can't stop thinking about the concept of identity capital. I had never heard that phrase before. Had you?
I don't think so. Definitely not in that form.
Yeah. I feel like there's something really special about people who have a clear identity capital. Like that has just been rolling around in my head now for the last 2 weeks of like, I love being friends with people whose identity capital is so clear. Like the way they show up in the world is so them. And that was just a light bulb moment for me that those are the types of people that I really love gathering around and I'm inspired by.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. I think that mix of authenticity and comfort with yourself to actually know yourself really well and be able to consistently show up like that is such an endearing quality and really magnetic.
Yeah, I think the thing is like showing up in that way, like in the most me way, isn't something that requires preparation, but it requires permission. Like I think that's the key is it's not like I have to try hard to be myself in that moment or I need to reflect and think like what is the most Taylor way to show up in this moment, but instead just allow myself to do that. And this weekend I actually had a pretty good example of that. I think I was telling you how I went to this event for a bunch of like female entrepreneurs. It was the 10th birthday party for a company called Dreamers and Doers.
Yeah, you mentioned it.
Yeah, and so it was really special. And I'm not a member of the community, but I know I've been following the founder for a while. I know members who absolutely love it. And as I think you know, I'm always running late to like everything by a few minutes. I'm never on time. And so I was and like any of those moments where I have an extra couple of minutes, I'm usually trying to pack them to the brim and then suddenly I'm late. So that's what happened is I was like about to leave and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I have so much time. What else can I do with the next 7 minutes because I don't need to be early." And in those 7 minutes, like without even thinking, I was like, I should bring a birthday card for the company. Like I should write a birthday card to say like happy birthday to the company. I love snail mail. I love envelopes. I love making cards. So I like got out my washi tape. I got out my stickers. I got out a cute
So
card.
Taylor.
And like it didn't even like nothing in my mind prepared for this moment. It was like I have 7 minutes. How can I show up to this birthday party for this company that's turning 10 in the most me way? Boom, I know exactly what to do. And yeah, it was very quick. And I think like that was a good moment as I was walking there. I thought back about this episode and was like, that was me exercising my identity capital. That was a me way to do this.
Firstly, I just love that. It's just but hearing how naturally it comes out for you is just
Yeah.
like, such a gift. You can just rock up and be like, yeah, this is me. But you didn't have to try.
Right. And I think that's when I admire it in other people, like the difference in it. Like my friend Emily, for example, she hosts amazing journaling classes. I'm actually going to one in person in 2 days. I've never been to any of the in person ones. And she, one time, I don't even know what she was talking about, whether it was her newsletter or her gatherings, or maybe it was just like the feeling she wants friends to feel when they come over to her apartment. But I remember her saying she wants these feelings, like these interactions, to feel like getting a wet kiss from grandma on your forehead. And
Oh,
that's just how she shows up in the world. Like she gives that kind of love in every little moment that she shows up is like that homemade grandma feel. And that's her identity capital. Like that is how she shows up when she writes an email, when she calls me, when I see her at an event and she hugs me is like that that homemade feel that grandma would give. So
hmm.
yeah, it's
Is
fun
there
to like unpack a friend's identity capital.
Yeah, completely. Is there anything that you would share with other people that are like striving for that identity capital?
I would do what you've done before, where I would talk to friends. Like, this isn't something that should be hidden. Like, this is something your friends know about you. What are the things that make you you when you show up in a room? When, like, if I said to my friends, like, when I show up in a room, what is the most tailor way to show up? Like, dream a bit with that. Like, what is like the most tailor way to show up? I think people would have an idea. And so I would ask that question. What is the most, whatever your name is, what is the most me way to show up in this room? What am I wearing? What am I saying? Am I playing music? Is there something I'm carrying? Like, those types, I think that can help really like bring together a visual that helps someone say, oh yeah, that's a me way of showing up, and I can see how that can be applied to the way that I show up on LinkedIn, or when I send a text on a really hard day, that it can be applied in a few different ways. How about you?
Interesting.
I'm curious what you would say.
I Well, I think it's interesting because the thing I've been thinking about also, firstly, it's just so nice to be in conversation with Jonas and see the quality of like emergence and like trust in
Mm.
emergence. And I know in our conversation with Alice Catter that also came through really clearly. And noticing, when does a system serve me, when doesn't a system serve me? Because what I was thinking a lot about is how to, I wasn't thinking of it in the identity capital language
Mhm.
as I was moving since we recorded it, but I was very much thinking of what how do I show up as me when I'm in an environment that isn't me? Right?
Mm.
Because hearing that story of Jonas when he was in that sales role, and he when he let him do him, it worked when he trusted himself. And I often think that there's like a really beautiful muscle to be built here that comes from a feedback loop. When I started learning meditation, you learn to meditate, and then the things that are most triggering in your life still trigger you. And you're like, what do you mean? I now meditate for a whole 10 minutes a day. So I should never get angry.
Right.
and And I remember speaking it out with some friends or a teacher, I don't know, and just like how actually that's a really hard thing to use a skill for. Like you're like taking baby steps. And actually
Mm.
those baby steps compound over time and then over months and years until actually those things that did trigger you really don't affect you anymore. And I was thinking of it in terms of, where in my life can I journal? Can I get reflections? Can I have feedback loops from friends in small moments as much as big moments? Because sometimes it's really overwhelming to be like, I'm in a corporate job, but I really can't work 9 to 5s, or whatever it might
Mm.
be. And actually often there's a lot of flex to work in ways that work for you, but you need to feel confident and comfortable that you're going to be able to deliver when you are you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I've just been thinking about, what are the micro muscles that you could build over time where you can celebrate being you in spaces that are natural for you, and then in spaces that are a little bit different. And then like
Mm-hmm.
really, and then over time, like, how do I be this version of me when I step into a board meeting, or like I walk into the bank to ask for a loan, and you don't start becoming someone else. You actually just like fully step in more and more to who you are in those different environments. Because I think, yeah, it's really easy to be you in like safe environments, when you're around your family, when you're around your close friends. I think the thing that I have been most impressed about Jonas is like, wherever he moves, whether it's going into the bank, or pitching to a client, whatever environment, and maybe you're like pitching to a really corporate client. How do I be me in that? Maybe everyone's in suits and I'm in like a t-shirt and shorts. So I don't think the work happens in those moments. I think a lot of the work happens when you're in those safer environments, taking note of like, wow, this thing that's very me really does serve me. and it really does allow me to impact the world in ways that are better than me trying to conform to other people and other people's approaches, and that can move into those more difficult environments where you're like, okay, yeah, I'm going to go and help a really corporate client do sales better, but I'm going to do it like me.
It's so funny that you bring up this example of like what you're wearing in a moment like this, like the casualness of shorts versus like a suit, because I feel like that's so you. Like if you ask me what is the Josh attire when walking in a room, like you're either in your Crocs or those little shoes that like are basically no shoes. What are they called?
Barefoots.
Yeah, that's a great name for
Vivo. No, the brand is Vivo, but they're like
okay,
barefoot
yeah,
shoes.
barefoots, yeah, whatever, Vivo. But I think it's just funny that like that's what you go to is describing what someone's wearing, because I feel like that is a very like you've got this founder who's in New York walking into the streets. Like I remember when we were hanging out and you were going to and meeting with investors, and you're like wearing these shoes, and I just remember thinking like that's so cool, like that's so you. Like it would be the weirdest thing to see you roll up post airport in a suit. I would be like, are you okay? And I think yeah, it's like cool to notice that you know, like yeah, you're not putting yourself in a certain box because of what might be expected or something. And I think that's what's cool. And I think the other thing that comes up is consistency. Consistency is a huge piece of it. It's like showing up again and again in that way, not just once, but that's how you start to build it. And I know a very tiny example. I had a friend the other day who texted me, hi, I just want to let you know that I really appreciate that you have made these two emojis part of what I associate with you as a human. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm honored. They are two of my favorite emojis. It's the disco ball emoji and then the pink heart with a little sparkle. And then she was like, and there's a close third, which is the celebration emoji. And I was like, wow, I have like really like she nailed it. I was like, those are definitely my three most used emojis. Thank you so much. And I think that it goes to show like when you latch on to certain things and you use them again and again, as simple as an emoji, people notice that. What does that say about you? It was just such a simple example that I felt like was spot on.
I love that. Wow. It was a great episode. It's great to chat about it. Where can we find out more about Jonas?
Excellent question. So you can find out about Jonas and his coaching at jonasaltman.com. We'll have all this in the show notes. So for anyone listening, please look below. He also runs a collective for entrepreneurs, which is at earlydoors.xyz, which I love. I've seen a few websites now that have XYZ, and that's just so fun to say at the end. And his practice is socialfabric.com. And he has a newsletter where he recently wrote about the art of letting go, which sparked my interest. So you can find that at shapers.substack.com. And he has a Mixcloud in case you want to jam out to something today. And that's also in the show notes. It's /Jonas Altman.
I highly recommend Jonas's musical taste. That is for sure.
And what about us?
Oh my gosh. You know, I was thinking, what a great environment to practice identity capital than in Grooves. You know, it's like such a safe space where people are really exploring who they are and trying to figure out ways to be more authentic and to craft ways of working and living that really work for you, for me, and in our individuality. So find us at groove.outofoffice.000 on the App Store, Groove Co-working, or Google Play, or it will be in the show notes. There'll be a link for you to have an extended trial to drop into the community and meet some of the community members that are crafting their own paths with authenticity and joy. So see you guys soon. Thanks.